Speak to Giorgio Cafiero, who's the CEO of Gulf State Analytics. Really good to have you on the program, Giorgio. We'll come to Gaza in a moment because we're talking about the West Bank right now. Let's talk about the occupied territories. The Americans, many European countries, interestingly, not Germany, have been condemning attacks by illegal Israeli settlers. And that's not even mentioning the Israeli military raids. There are many people, there seems to be a growing feeling in the occupied territories that Israeli actions are producing the seeds of a future conflict. Do you think that it's counterproductive for Israel to be doing what it's doing in the occupied territories?
Well, certainly, but I think it's important to address these moves by the U.S. and some other Western governments. There are, these moves that go after specific settlers in the West Bank who have carried out acts of violence against Palestinians in the occupied territory. But by targeting specific settlers, it seems to suggest that the US government and other Western governments don't seem to believe they need to take on the occupation at large, making this instead seem like this is an issue related to specific settlers. It's also telling that Germany is not even a part of this symbolic move against specific settlers. Also, in other European countries, we see the rise of the far right, in which you have politicians in countries such as the Netherlands that are outrightly supportive of settler violence against Palestinians in the West Bank. So, point being, I don't really think Israel is jeopardizing much with its relationships with Western governments over the occupation in the West Bank, but there's no denying that the resistance in the West Bank on the part of Palestinians is definitely intensifying, and that's going to create very serious problems for the Israelis.
Really, really interesting point about the occupation as a whole, Giorgio, because it suddenly occurs to me that when you listen to the statements from Western leaders who have been speaking since October the 7th, probably only the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres is the man who said, remember, this didn't happen in a vacuum. What about the future of Gaza? What are the Americans preparing for? And is it going to be the Americans and the Israelis who decide and make sure that the Palestinians are the ones to pick up the pieces? Or is it going to be only the Americans? And what effect will that have on this extremely right-wing Israeli government?
Well, I'm sure as your viewers are aware, this question about who is going to have administrative authority in Gaza after the dust settles is a source of disagreement between the Biden administration and the Netanyahu government. The Biden administration thinks, in my opinion, extremely naively so, that President Abbas and the PA are going to be in a position to come into Gaza and take over from Hamas. This completely disregards the views that Palestinians, not only in Gaza, but also in the West Bank and really all over the world, have of Abbas, seeing him as a leader who has lost his legitimacy. He's collaborated with the Israeli occupiers. He has failed to produce any positive results for the Palestinians. Recent polling data, I think from 1 or 2 days ago, confirmed that a very small percentage of the Palestinian people believe that Abbas deserves their support. So it's completely unrealistic, this idea of Abbas and the PA coming in to take over from Hamas. The Israelis, though, are intent on reoccupying Gaza. The Biden administration is of the view that it's not right for Israel to do this, not appropriate for Israel. They're voicing their opinions about this, but there's really no pressure that the Biden administration is putting on Israel to not reoccupy Gaza. So I think that's what's going to happen. But there is going to be a very disciplined and very violent resistance. And therefore, I don't know how long the Israelis will be able to do a reoccupation of Gaza. There are, of course, political factors inside Israel. It's not going to bode well for the government if many Israelis are being killed every day, every week, every month during a reoccupation of Gaza. So it's not clear what the future of Gaza is, but we can certainly say it does not look bright whatsoever.
Giorgio, you know how these two ways work, right? The presenter asks you a specific question, then you address that question. But because you are who you are, and because you know what you know, I'm just going to leave the final question to you, okay? You address whatever you think is the most important thing that's been appearing and reappearing in your mind over the past few weeks.
Well, I think that what Israel is doing is not going to lead to long-term security for the Israelis. I think the incursion into southern Israel on October 7th, which resulted in roughly 1,200 Israeli deaths, has traumatized Israel, and the country's leadership has been responding based on its desire for revenge and its desire to demonstrate that Israel is going to smash Hamas in a very intense way. But there's a lack of strategic thinking on the part of Israel's leadership. The conditions that made Hamas popular in the first place are not going to go away as Israel continues to carry out its war crimes in Gaza. We've seen that Hamas's popularity has actually increased. Now we have so many Palestinians in Gaza who are orphans, people who have nothing to live for. They're increasingly militant, increasingly radicalized. It is just crazy for someone to argue that this is going to bode well for Israel's long-term security interests.
Giorgio, thank you so much indeed. Always appreciated. Giorgio Cafiero in Washington.